Hi, it's Barbara Bunsey again. Today we're going to work on these little Christmas ornaments. I call them penny Christmas ornaments. The reason I named them that and my inspiration for the design were these little scallops at the bottom of the wood piece. As soon as I looked at those, I was reminded of the penny rugs that frugal housewives made back in the 19th century, probably around time of the Civil War or so. If you're not familiar with a penny rug, here's a sample. As you can see, it has these little tabs on the outside edges, and then there are little circles in those tabs, all done with a blanket stitch attached on. And then there are some pieces cut out for the design in the center. This is all done with felted fabric. Back in the day, they would have used blankets or clothing or something that wasn't any good anymore, and so they would use the pieces of the fabric that were still good to make the rugs. Probably recycling, maybe the beginning part of recycling as we know it. So again, I tried to create these to look like pieces of felt that were cut out in the various shapes and then stitched on with the blanket stitch. I do always seal my wood before I get started painting. These are masonite, probably don't need to be sealed as much as raw wood, but I do think it gives you a much nicer surface to paint on. I'm going to give you a little tip. Since I used black for my background here, what I used to seal with was black gesso. So I'm kind of base coating and sealing at the same time. So first one coat of the black gesso, then sand it. You can sand it with just a piece of your tracing paper. And then I go ahead and put my paint color on, and that way I'll do the two coats and it's sealed and base coated pretty quickly. And then of course, once that first base coat is dry, you want to sand before you put your pattern on. Another little thing I'd like to tell you is when I'm trying to get nice circles, not only do I use that when I'm inking my pattern, but I also, as I'm transferring my pattern onto my surface, I use a circle template that I found, I believe, at Office Depot many years ago. You can see it has various sized circles on it. And that way you're sure that you're getting a nice round shape. If you trace it without this, sometimes your circle gets wobbly. By the time you paint it, it's even more wobbly. And then if I need something larger than this, which obviously on these ornaments I don't, but I just go around my studio and try to find something circular. Like for example, this coaster. If I need a big circle, this is what I'm going to use for my template. So just a little tip on getting some really nice, perfect circles there. Okay, let's get to painting. This one is going to be pretty quick and easy because the colors are very repetitive, and I'm going to just show you a few areas on here. Oh, I should back up and say, the other thing I did was I used embroidery floss for my hanger. I just found some colors that coordinated with the design that I have, and separated that into one floss for 3 different colors, and then attached that to my surface, and that's what I'm going to use to hang my ornaments on my tree. Okay, so once again, we are going to get started with some painting. All right, let's start working on the leaves and on the berries. What I did for this, I wanted to create or try to create a look that looked like the felt, so that it wasn't a smooth surface. It had a little bit of stipple to it, so it kind of looked like the fabric might be raised a little bit. And so in order to do that, I used a brush that I was introduced to not too long ago that I just absolutely love. It's called a Mezzaluna Brush. This is by FM Black Gold, or Dynasty is the name of the company. And it has these, I don't know if you can see that since we've got black on black there. And it comes in a variety of sizes from small, medium, large, and extra large. So you can use them in the various sizes for whatever surface that you're working on. Obviously, I'm working on a surface here that's a little bit bigger than the ornaments are, so I'm going to use a little bit bigger brush. For the ornaments, I used the small Mezzaluna, and that gave me the look, exact look that I wanted. And again, since I'm using some of the same colors over and over again, especially like between the candy canes and the mittens. So I'm just going to show you on the candy canes what I did, and then you're just going to repeat those steps for when you're working on the mittens. Okay, so let's get going here. My first step, what I did was I base coated my holly leaves with the dark leaves. The two back leaves are base coated in antique green. I'm sorry, avocado. The center one is base coated in antique green. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing of base coating because I think you all know how to do that. I'm just going to show you that when I'm doing something that has points or corners in it like the holly leaf does, I put my brush down basically in the center of the area and pull into the point. So I'm pressing down as I start my base coat, and as I get into the point, I just release pressure. I'm not turning the brush or anything. And then kind of continue along down here, and I can flip my brush over and go into that point. It's always easier to pull into a point than it is to start on that point, especially if it's a narrow, acute point there. Okay, so once again, avocado and antique green are the two colors I used for that. I also did use those same colors for my pennies on this rug, and I used green for the pennies on the mitten as well. And these are based with the avocado. And the pennies on the holly, even though I did the avocado here, I did use burlap to do that. And we'll go over that a little bit too when we get to that area. Okay, so once again, I'm going to use my Mezzaluna brush, and I'm going to go in with one that's a little bit bigger, again, because I have a larger area that I'm working on here. And I do use this brush dry. I don't add any water to it whatsoever. I'm going to start out by loading my brush in my base color. So that's the avocado. I'm starting there because when I'm doing my highlights, I always start with the darker first and then move my way up to the lighter. So I'm adding some paint to my brush, but I'm taking a lot of it out on my palette. I'm going to pick up some antique green and work that into the brush. So it's kind of blending those two colors together. And I'm going to start in the center of that area of my leaf and just tap in. I want my brightest color in the center, that's why I start there, and then as I'm coming out to the outside edge, I kind of release pressure a little bit and let it kind of fade to the outside edge. I'm going to pick up a little bit more antique green in my brush. Work that in. This leaf I already put one coat of the antique green on, but it's not showing up enough for me, so I'm adding a little bit more. Again, starting in the center and tapping that color in a little bit toward the outside edge. Since my center leaf is already base coated in antique green, I have that color in my brush already, so I'm not going to really add any more to it. Maybe let's pick up just a tad. I'm going to come in with my margarita, and again I'm going to work that into my brush. And I already basically have that tapped in here, but I'll add just a teeny bit more. Again, I'm starting in the center of each of these areas and letting it fade out toward the outside edge. Then I'm going to come and pick up just a tad more margarita in my brush, tap it out. And once again, I'm going to start in the center of that area and just let it fade out. And then it's the same thing on these pennies down here. Here was my base coat. Here's where I added antique green. And then here's where I added a little bit of margarita to it. Speaking of those pennies, let me show you how I got those base coated. Whenever I'm working on any kind of a round surface, I like to use a round brush, a filbert brush, because the outside edges are nice and round and it gives me a nice round area to work on. This one's a little bit big maybe for that area, but let's give it a go. Let's base coat in the white pennies that are on the actual holly ornament. So I loaded my brush in water, wet it in water. I'm going to load my paint from the side of the puddle, and I'm using the burlap. I think I'm using burlap. Yes, I am. It looked a little light to me. Okay. So again, I'm just going to let those bristles kind of do the work for me and get nice and round in here. So that's how I base coated all. It's a little sloppy, said I should probably have a little smaller brush while I'm working on this. And you're probably going to need, I think on these small ones, I used maybe a number 2 or 3 round brush, loaded it flat to get that nice round shape. Or you could probably go in with a number 6 filbert, be a little bit large, but if you like using a larger brush, that's going to work really well for you. And then I also used the same technique to base coat my berries. So while we're here, let's talk about working on the berries. I'm going to move over, however, to my candy canes because I want to show you how I do this. The candy canes obviously are red and white, but instead of doing only the white strokes first and then filling in with the red, I just paint the entire area with the white, or the burlap I should say, all the way around. And then I come in, I'm using Heritage Brick for my stripes on my candy cane. I don't have them marked in, so I'm just kind of eyeballing this. And then I'm going to stroke those on. Again, I always load from the side of the puddle, pressing down so I don't have any ridges on my brush. And let's just add one more stripe on here. Then that way I don't have to worry about, oh my goodness, this stripe, now I need to get in here and try to get close up with the white. It's already done with the white. Now all I'm doing is adding my red. This is still wet, so I'm not going to do it right now, but let me just tell you, for my second base coat, I come back the opposite direction. It gives me better coverage, and it kind of squares up any rough edges that I might have there. Okay, so let's move over here to our berries. I'm going to tell you too that red is notoriously difficult color to cover over, especially a dark color. So what I did in this case, I mixed some burlap and the heritage brick together to get kind of a pink color, and I used that for my first base coat. I probably should have left that for you. I apologize. And then my second base coat, I just went in straight with heritage brick. You might need to add a third coat, but it's certainly going to be a lot less than maybe 10 coats or more of just trying to get that red over the black. The white's going to act as kind of a barrier and make the paint a lot more opaque. To do my highlights on my red areas, so that's my berries and my stripes, I'm again using a dry Mezzaluna brush, again by Dynasty. I'm picking up a little bit of spiced pumpkin in my brush and working it in and taking the excess out. And again, I'm just tapping that right in the center of my berry. I'm just going to pick up a tiny bit more paint. I'm going to come over here to my candy cane. I'm going to do the same thing. In the center of each red area, I'm tapping on a little bit of spiced pumpkin. And again, you want to start in the center and just kind of have it fade out as you go to the outside edges of each of those areas. This color is going to fade a little bit, not to worry, because after we have it loaded in that color, now I'm going to come over here to Coral Shell and pick up a little bit of that in my brush. And I really want to work that in because this color is pretty light compared to the orange. I don't want it to be too bright. So again, on my berry, I start in the center and tap that color in. I think that's dry enough to add some there. And then over onto the candy cane, same thing, as you can see. Pretty simple. And this again just gives that little texture of the felted fabric. As I said, I'm not going to do this on my mitten because we're using the exact same colors. So here on the mitten, I first tapped in the spiced pumpkin and then again a little bit of the coral shell. And my pennies again are done with avocado, then tapped in with a little bit of antique green and then a little bit of margarita again on the dirty brush. You always want to keep using a dirty brush so you get those colors mixed together so they don't jump out at you too much. Okay, so pretty quick and easy there, I think you can see. Let's go ahead and start adding some light color to my to the white areas. Actually, I think I did base that penny in the wrong color. I think that is my highlight color. So we'll ignore that penny. Let's pretend it was base coated with burlap. But let's come over here to the candy canes, because these white areas are done exactly the same as the white pennies on the holly ornament. I'm going to use one of the same brushes that I used previously. I washed the paint out of it, so it has a little bit of water in it. I took as much out as I could on my paper towel, and then I rub it on my palm. The friction and the warmth from my hand helps to get the rest of that water out. So it's a teeny bit damp, but it really is pretty good to use. If you feel it's damp or cold, if it's cold, you know it still has water in it. But again, that friction and the warmth from my hand helps to take the extra water out. And you can mess around with these brushes. They're at least for me, I use them for the stippling, so it doesn't matter if they're all messed up. For the highlight in the white areas, I'm picking up a little bit of sugared peach, and again, taking the excess out. And again, right in the center of each of those center areas of the white, on the candy cane, and on the pennies, and on the fur of the mitten. So again, starting in the center, tapping it in, and then I'm going to pick up a little bit more sugared peach in my brush and add just a tiny bit more highlight on each of those areas. And again, I just think this gives it that really nice, pretty texture that the felt has. Okay, so again, pretty easy peasy on getting those highlights in. Let's go ahead and start adding some shading. Since my green leaves, my green areas, hopefully are dry by now, let's go in and start working on those. Let's see. On the back leaves, let's go ahead and we're going to add some plantation pine. By the way, all these colors that I'm giving you are by DecoArt. So I'm picking up paint in the corner of the brush, blending it out on my palette, as we always do. And I'm going to shade the outside edges. This leaf doesn't have much highlight on it, but just so you see, it's the outside edges of these two back leaves. So it's going to be the outside edge and then also where it lays under, they both lay underneath that center leaf. Let's pick up a little bit more paint. Work it in my brush, and as you can see, I work in the same path always, so I don't waste paint or moisture. So again, laying it flat, pulling into the corner like I told you before. Work it into the corner, lay it flat, pull it into that point. And I pick up just a tad more water in my brush, grab a little more paint. And here again, I'm coming in right next to my top leaf. And you're going to do that all the way around. And you're doing the exact same thing on your pennies down here. You might want to switch to a smaller brush, since those are a little smaller. But again, I'm going to pick up some plantation pine in my brush and blend it out. This is the one that has all the highlight on it, so let's float on that one. And again, I'm just going to float some color on the outside edge to just kind of set it in and look kind of, I want to push it down a little bit so where my stitching is, looks like it's more pushed down in that area than on the top part. Okay, and then my top leaf, I am going to float all around the outside edges again to set that down, this time with avocado, which is the color that I base coated my back leaves with. So again, lay it flat on the flat area, pull into the point, and then I always pull a little extra paint in that little V area of a point. So now I can lay my brush down flat and pull into that other point. And again, I'm going to work my paint down and pull into my final point. Let's come here. We'll just work on this one side of the leaf, because I want to let that paint dry before I come back and do the opposite side. But you can see how that gives you a little bit of texture and dimension now to that leaf that you didn't have before. Let's go ahead and start working on the red and white areas. I'm putting out a little bit of espresso on my palette, and that's what I'm going to use to do my shading on my white areas. And again, since this is a little smaller area, you might want to switch to a smaller brush as you're working on these white areas on the candy cane. So again, I'm just going to pick up some paint on the side of my brush, blend it out. And I'm going to shade each side of my white areas. So what you need to do in that case, so you don't lift the paint, is I do one side all the way around. You can come back and sneak in the opposite side. Try not to lay your brush down on the first shading that you put in. So right now I'm working on the candy cane that's behind the one on top. Guess I didn't leave a whole lot of room on that one. But I guess sometimes candy canes aren't perfect. Let's see. That's pretty dry, so let's come back now. Just keep adding paint to my brush, and again, blending on the same path. And now I'm going to add shading to the top and bottom of each of those sections that I already shaded with on the sides. And again, this kind of makes it look like each of these is a different piece of fabric. I love the way this espresso color works on the base color that we have, since the burlap has a little bit of pinky red to it, as does the espresso. I think it gives it a really, really pretty color. Okay, you get the idea there. All right, let's go ahead and work on shading our red areas. This time I'm going in with Antique Maroon, again by Deco Art. Let's start working on the candy canes this time. That way they'll definitely be dry by the time we come around. So once again, I'm going to use the Antique Maroon on one side of each of the red areas. Or I should say on all sides, coming down right now just on one side of that. Making sure that the opposite side, when I put my brush down, I'm not laying it down on any wet paint. Let's add some on here. Okay. And then on the berries, it's the exact same thing, basically. Going to just, like we did on the pennies, come around the outside edge, and you can see already, just putting that little bit of color on there, what a difference it makes to the appearance of the piece. I'm going to do this one so I don't lift any color up on that first one. Okay, all the way through. And then we'll come back over here to the candy canes real quick. And again, I'm just going to add some shading on the opposite side of where I did the first shading. And once again, you can see how pretty that makes each of these sections look. It just makes them pop when you do that. You're on this corner one here, you're going to have to do 3 strokes. I already did that one. I'm doing this, and when this one's dry, I'll come back and do that bottom. But again, you know how to do this. I just want to give you some basics on what I did. Okay, so now we need to add our stitching. For the stitching on the holly leaves, I used Aloe, which is, I think, a new color from Deco Art since last year. And I'm using my liner brush. And as you know, when you're using a liner, you need extra paint in the water and the brush. And I'm just stitching right down the center. This is for the veins, so I'm coming down the center. So I'm adding just little lines here and lifting as if this was, think about stitching, how you would see the stitch and then you wouldn't see the back side of the stitch. And this is what I'm doing on all 3 leaves. Let's get this one done real quick. You see how the color kind of changes a little bit when you're working on the lighter color leaf. And you can add as many veins as you want to these. And on the pennies, you can certainly add different colors to those pennies if you want. You can do whatever colors you want, as long as you keep it coordinated to the colors that we have on the palette. And then I used Margarita, again with my liner brush. And I used this color to stitch on my berries. So I started, I need a little more water. I started on the berry and pulled out. You can do what you want, but I wanted my stitches to look pretty even on the inside edge here. That's why I did it this way. I just felt I had better control. And if by chance you get a line that goes out there, you can either clean it up with your finger or a damp brush or wait till it dries. You can come back and paint all the way around your area with black, and that'll take care of cleaning that up. Let's get just this one berry. I'm going to add the stitching to it. We don't need to do all 3. I think you get the idea on this. And then I used the same color, the Margarita, and I stitched in each piece of fabric on my candy canes. But I did them individually instead of pulling the line straight through. I added the lines in one area, and then I kind of staggered just a teeny little bit on the white area so it didn't look like it was just one great big stitch. So again, here, here, here. And then I'm going to stagger these stitches a little bit, again, to make it look a little different. And let's stitch this side on. We'll stitch this side on. I'm going to do this one too. So you get the idea here. I did basically the same thing here on my, mitten. Oh, well, yeah, okay. On the mitten, however, I used antique green to do all the stitching all the way around the mitten and the cuff. I have something else to tell you about that in a minute. But let's come back over here to the stitching on my holly leaves. I wanted to give this a little bit of highlight and shadow as well. So I still have Margarita in my brush. I'm just adding a tiny little bit of that to the center of each of my stitches, just to give them a little bit of dimension. We'll do this leaf here. I'll leave the other one without it so you can see the difference. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I think it does add a little bit more interest to the piece. And then what I did on my mitten, after I did my antique green, I just touched a little bit of Margarita to the inside edges of those stitches. And I came back with some plantation pine, or actually you can use avocado. That'll work too, one of the darker greens. And on my stitches, on my veins for the holly leaves, I added just a teeny little bit of that dark green on each end of each of those stitches. So it looks like that stitch is going down inside the fabric. Just getting just a teeny little bit of shadow there. And again, I think you can see how different that looks when you do that as opposed to just you leaving the stitches plain. However, if you don't want to add this little detail, it's your piece. I always tell people, so you have to do what works for you. Okay, I'm just going to do those. On the margarita ones, you can come back here and add maybe a little bit of avocado on the outside edge to set those in. And you can do the same thing here on your candy cane. Just touch it with some avocado on the outside edge of each of those margarita stitches. I was going to say stripes, but they are stitches. And that'll help bring it out, even especially on the dark areas. Let's see what else. Okay, so then the outsides of my rug, just like the sample that I showed you, needs to have some stitching going all the way around the outside edge. And that, if back then it was done to keep the fabrics from fraying, for one thing. And so I'm using, again, my liner brush and aloe. And as I said, you can change these colors up however you want. You can add red stitching or burlap stitching around the outside edge. It's totally, totally up to you. And here's the edge of my ornament, so I'm just going to add some stitches. And this is going to go all around the entire outside edge. I don't think I really need to finish that for you. I think you get the idea. You can see how to do that. And I did use this same color for all three of them because I wanted to keep them a little bit more uniform. You can, again, certainly do whatever you want. You can change up the different color stitching. I didn't put my little scallops here, but we'll just pretend I did. And you'll have a straight one kind of where the scallop comes up, and then you're going to start adding your stitches around the second one. Okay, I think that's about it, except for that I did stitch all the pennies in with black, just plain black. And let me show you again the mittens, since we didn't really work on it. But again, it is done exactly as I did the red areas on my berries and my candy canes. And the white is based in burlap and done exactly like the white areas on the candy cane and these pennies right here. Stitched in with antique green and then touched with a little bit of margarita on the inside edges just to spark them up a little bit. And as I said, all the pennies are stitched around the outside edge with aloe. Oh, I did forget one thing. See, that happens to me all the time. Let's hurry up real quick. I want to show you that I did then use a little bit of asphaltum after I got all my shading done on my candy canes. I came back in with just a little bit of asphaltum, side load and blend, because I wanted to make sure this candy cane looks like it's sitting on top of that one. So even though the stitching is already on there, because a shadow would be on the stitching, I'm adding a little bit of asphaltum on this bottom candy cane right next to where it sits on top of the front one. And there you can see how that just kind of helps set those two apart. Once you have this all done and they're dry, make sure you get all your pattern lines off and varnish them. I do like using the Deco Art Soft Touch Varnish. It gives a beautiful finish. It's a brush on, but I never have any bubbles or any brush strokes after I'm done with it. And there you are. Again, add a little bit of embroidery floss or whatever you like there to use as hangers, and you're all set to hang these on your tree. Thanks for joining us again. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. And if you have any questions or anything, feel free to contact me at bbunsey@calicogoose.com. Until next time, Merry Christmas.